We are living through this ongoing and intense backlash to that early Supreme Court decision, you may remember, early in the political calendar, if you go back about 2 years, to overturn Roe v. Wade. That was a 50-year precedent that, of course, had always provided women in the United States the right to choose for the entire duration of those 50 years. It was the first time the Supreme Court ever retracted a human right in American history.
In this historic decision, the Supreme Court has now overturned Roe v. Wade.
This is a devastating day.
The radical Supreme Court is eviscerating Americans' rights.
This is insane.
I'm worried for the young women who are on opposition, who don't understand how at risk their lives may be.
My number one is pro-life, and I'm going to vote pro-life.
I am absolutely concerned about voting for reproductive rights.
The first ballot test for abortion rights, and the answer was clear, and it was decisive.
I think this is a resounding message that when you put abortion on a ballot, it wins.
The Supreme Court heard its first major abortion case since overturning Roe v. Wade in 2022.
What the justices could ultimately decide would impact a women who want to get access to the abortion pill mifepristone, even in states where abortion is legal.
You're looking at all of that because that is the road and context for where we are right now. There was this earth-shattering decision from the court that overturned Roe. And since then, we have heard from people who supported that decision, including justices themselves, that that was the end of it, that would resolve it, nothing to worry about. And they were wrong. And in a few minutes, I'll get into why this is such big news tonight. But we have to understand how so many people on the right then took the Roe decision and went further. Let me just remind you a couple of the headlines you may remember, and some you may not, because there's been a lot of this at the state level. Idaho became, under that new ability under overturning Roe, under the Dobbs decision, to be one of the most extreme anti-abortion states, implementing laws restricting any travel, meaning now it's not just restricting your body and your decision with your doctor, but whether a woman could travel for her own health care. Texas, falling right in that same plan. Clinics in 15 states then that were offering abortions had to stop that year alone because of the issues around what many feared would then be the next step of prosecution. Republican lawmakers also flatly rejecting one of the compromises that they used to promise, that in the event, and I'm going to say this quite literally tonight because this is the story hitting the high court, that in the event that someone was criminally raped or criminally abused through incest, that they would have that right. That was also rejected by, as you see, Republican lawmakers. That's an AP story, just a nonpartisan summary of that policy action. Now, recently, the implications of overturning Roe have been wider than just so-called abortion issues. Alabama's judges took the ball and ran way down the field. They ruled under a step that they say God, quite literally God, required, that there should no longer be IVF allowed because any frozen embryos should legally be treated as children. Alabama's own Republican governor then signed a bill protecting IVF treatments in that state, but that's, again, how far it went. Republicans had buyer's remorse because cracking down on people attempting to have kids through modern science, just like cracking down on actual abortion itself, proved to be something that was extremely unpopular, even in red states. Now, then there's the talk about contraception. Today's Supreme Court hearing was regarding the abortion pill. So everything I'm showing you is the lead up to the top news today, as the justices have to decide whether this is the policy bed they want to actually sleep in, and whether access to abortion pills, which is one of the ways that most women exercise early-term abortions, is something that should now also be cut off or nationally restricted. Again, not just at the state level. Now, it may be a long time till we get the decision, but I can report for you tonight that with the context of everything going out in the country, including this women's backlash, suddenly now the justices are skeptical about taking another step to further limit access to this health care decision by women. Indeed, it was unusual to see unity on this kind of social issue, but conservatives like Gorsuch, Barrett, and Kavanaugh were, at least in the questioning, joining other more liberal Democratic appointees on the court, as they expressed what could only be called doubts about taking another step to try to have the government, that's what this is, that's why it's not very traditionally conservative, have the government prevent women from making these choices themselves.
I'd understood the conscience harm as Justice Barrett does, but you suggest that there's a broader one.
Under federal law, no doctors can be forced against their consciences to perform or assist in an abortion, correct?
I think what Justice Jackson's alluding to, we've had, one might call it a rash of universal injunctions.
Is it the first time? Is it the only time any court has restricted access to an FDA-approved drug by second-guessing FDA's expert judgment?
Justice Jackson also discussed one of the issues at the center of all this, whether the claims here, which are by a group of people who are anti-abortion, who also have medical degrees, so they're basically anti-abortion doctors, whether that group filing this challenge should be able to somehow push along a debate that otherwise wasn't happening, that they should kind of get this up to the court and then dictate some new restriction that even the government nonpartisan scientists don't think is necessary and prevent every woman in the nation from being able to access this medical choice.
What they're asking for here is that in order to prevent them from possibly ever having to do these kinds of procedures, everyone else should be prevented from getting access to this medication. So why isn't that plainly overbroad scope of the remedy the end of this case?
Good question, right? Ultimately, this case, like the case that overturned Roe, circles back to the same underlying questions, even though this time the court and the Republican appointees may be afraid for various reasons to go further, but it's about freedom. Freedom for women to make these choices or not, and whether the government will restrict that freedom. And let's be clear. I've mentioned this before. There are strong religious objections to abortion. There are people who feel very strongly about this, who feel that this is a life and death issue. But when it comes to how we have generally tried to address those type of religious debates in our country, we have freedom of religion and freedom of choice and action. So people who want to tell their peers, their fellow citizens about their religious views or urge them to do or not do something are free to do that, to speak that. We have great, robust protections for freedom of worship and religious speech, as we should. The question was, again, in overruling Roe originally and today, whether that kind of view, which can only really be called a theocracy, where that kind of view should then govern other people's lives, that the government should say, if you don't go to church or observe Shabbat or you name it, follow someone else's religious views on pregnancy, then you should be legally restricted. And as we all know, legally restricted means, as we've seen in some of these states, doesn't stop with the restriction. There becomes other restrictions like freedom of movement and travel, women being told, like some Handmaid's Tale, that they can't travel, they can't move around in their state or go to another state, or that not only are they restricted in what they do with their health care, but they might be punished for it. I showed you last night, then candidate Trump saying women and doctors who do this, who exercise this medical choice, should ultimately be punished or imprisoned. This is not overreach. This is what the debate is right now. Now, in the Roe majority, I mentioned earlier I was going to show you this, and now I am. We were told that women would keep their power and the issue would be returned to the states. This is judicial speech for, hey, no biggie. Justice Alito writing, women are not without electoral political power, and that they could then go to the states and get this all worked out. Of course, if there's a national ban, or if judges take it further, as they did in Alabama to restrict IVF, then the fact that women are allowed to vote doesn't override what the judges do. Now, there are other cases where abortion rights in the Supreme Court are still front and center because you have the contraception, you have IVF. Marriage equality is now on the chopping block. And the question, when you limit the electoral and political power of women and minorities, or you have these kind of crackdowns of democracy, is why should women, according to the justice's argument there, have to mobilize for years on end just to undo what a couple of unelected judges did? In other words, Justice Alito is saying we've upended the status quo, 50 years of precedent, but if you really feel strongly, go out and vote. And let me tell you, although there are problems with that kind of judicial logic, women are going out and vote. They're demonstrating this power again and again. Everywhere that there's been a vote since Roe was overturned, people, red, blue, purple states have come out and expanded or protected abortion access. When you look writ large at what women think, the vast majority, over 8 out of 10, think at least some abortion should be legal. And they have the opportunity, of course, to advocate for these rights this November, because take a look. This might be bad news for Trump and the Republicans, but this is what I told you has been happening since they overturned Roe. Here we are going into November 24, and this is all the places where abortion is on the ballot, which may mobilize even more people to treat this as the big issue. So I played a little bit of what we heard in the Supreme Court today, that they may not actually go as far as the right-wingers wanted and take the next step and limit abortion further.
If it makes you feel any better, I have already put EVAC on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
Sir, come on, when is it not, please? Okay, couple of things. I'm running low on the dough. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah. I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I'll assume that we're going on the other stuff.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Right, Evac.
She's right in front.
We are facing a heavy, sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark aircraft. General! General! Need to immediately evacuate. Hold on. National security advisory. Stand down. Check it out. The business operations. The amateurs. Suicide mission.